welcome back to my podcast. I'm your host, Zunaira, back with another reflective episode. Oh, and this background is brought to you by 24Relax on YouTube. Today's episode is going to be focused on my culminating assignment on the discovery of approximately 200 unmarked graves near Camp Loops from residential school. This project challenged me to analyze colonial violence through multiple lenses, such as post-colonial, powerless, indigenous, and mental health critical lenses, while also examining how literature such as Night by Elie Wiesel and other forms of media expose both the historical and the ongoing impacts of forced assimilation. Before diving into my reflection, here's a quick but necessary reminder of what residential schools really were. Residential schools in Canada were created under the belief of kill the Indian in him and save the man, a slogan that reveals the genocidal mindset embedded in the system itself. Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families, stripped of their languages, culture, spiritual practices, and identity. They were subjected to physical punishment, emotional abuse, sexual violence, spiritual disconnection, and extreme neglect. These institutions were never about education. They were about erasure, control, and forced assimilation. The 2021 discovery of 215 unmarked graves at the former residential school of Camp Loops did not reveal a new truth. It just confirmed what Indigenous communities had been saying for generations. Children were taken, children had suffered, and some of them never came back home. This discovery forced Canada to confront the reality of its colonial past and expose how deeply denial, silence, and systemic racism are rooted in society. With this in mind, I will reflect on what I learned from creating my digital website. What I liked best about this assignment was the freedom to connect real-world history with literature and visual media. Instead of only focusing on one book or one form of media, I used to write with testimonies, historical photographs, memorial images, and children's literature to understand the Camp Loops discovery through a psychological perspective, but also an emotional and political. For example, I used I Am Not a Number by Jenny Kay to examine how the children were stripped of their names, identity, and culture in residential schools, exactly what the unmarked graves at Camp Loops represents. Sugar and Milk by Tirthi Omrigar allowed me to explore displacement and cultural survival through story. This approach made the project feel more meaningful and alive. When I look back at the assignment, the part I most enjoyed working on was creating connections between different forms of media and literature, such as I'm Not a Number, Sugar and Milk, Night, The Day You Begin, survivor testimonies, and the Camp Loops discovery itself, because it allowed me to see how a system of colonial violence can affect multiple generations. This made the project feel more meaningful and real rather than just academic. It made me feel as though I wasn't just analyzing history, but helping preserve it and connecting stories that are often ignored or dismissed. Making these connections helped me understand how systems of power rewrite narratives to protect themselves while silencing the people they harm. The most difficult part of this assignment was emotionally processing the stories of children who never made it home. Learning of the Camp Loops graves, seeing memorials with tiny shoes and orange shirts, and realizing just how many families were left without answers for generations was more than just overwhelming. This project made me confront the fact that these were not just distant historical events or facts. This was about real children and the fact that justice is still incomplete. I was most successful at using the powerless and indigenous lens to expose how the system specifically targeted these defenseless children. I showed how colonial power operated through forced removal, stripping children of their names, physical punishment, and documentation that treated these little children as just mere proofs of successful assimilation. I also connected these systems to long-term mental health impacts such as PTSD, depression, addiction, suicide, and family disconnection that continue today. One thing I learned from this assignment was how denial continues to harm Indigenous communities even after the truth has been uncovered. The media posts I analyzed when someone claimed that residential school children looked happy in photos made me realize just how deeply rooted colonial gaslighting is. Even after the discovery of 215 graves, people still question these survivors. This showed me that decolonization is not just about just uncovering history or finding more evidence. It's about challenging the people who refuse to accept the truth. I would assess my work for this assignment as good. I invested time to research, emotional processing, and deep analysis. I made strong connections across literature, history, and media. However, I always know that there's more room to grow. One thing I need to improve on my next assignment is learning how to manage emotional overload while working through traumatic topics, such as this. Projects centered on residential schools, survivor trauma, and the memoir Night by Ugly Wiesel was heavy. I found myself being overwhelmed multiple times. Learning how to balance emotional sensitivity with an academic focus is something I want to improve on. One goal I would like to focus on in the future is continuing to amplify silenced voices and using literature as a tool for justice and awareness. I want my future work to reflect not just understanding, but also my responsibility as a student and as a Canadian citizen. This project changed the way that I see history, education, and even silence. The Kamloops discovery made it impossible for me to ignore what colonialism did and continues to do to Indigenous families. The unmarked graves are not just evidences of death, but proof of a system that worked exactly as it was designed to. Through this, I learned that the truth can be buried, but it will also always rise. This assignment taught me that education can never be neutral. Silence is never harmless, and that remembrance is never optional. Thank you for listening. This is Zunaira Mansuri, and this truth will stay with me for the rest of my life. But what about you?